That night, the city was in mourning, or at least it felt that way. A relentless, frigid rain descended from a sky the color of a fresh bruise, distorting the neon signs into blurry, indistinct streaks of color and transforming the streets into slick, black mirrors. The hour was late, and the city's usual vibrant energy had subsided into a low hum, leaving only the persistent sound of the downpour and the whoosh of passing cars cutting through the water. In a world that seemed to have surrendered to sleep, one man remained acutely aware, sharply focused. Tahung sat in the plush back seat of a sleek, dark car, the engine emitting a soft, almost feline purr as they navigated the slick streets. He was a man who seemed to carry the weight of silence itself. To those who knew of him, or rather knew about him, he was a king in a clandestine world of shadows, the leader of an organization so influential that his name was uttered only in hushed tones. The Korean Mafia. The title itself was designed to inspire fear, and he cultivated that fear, understanding that it was a necessary tool for maintaining order. But in the hushed confines of the car, stripped of his title, he was simply a man bearing the immense burden of a city on his shoulders. He stared out the window, his strong jaw clenched, his eyes missing absolutely nothing. His driver, a burly, taciturn man named June, kept his gaze fixed on the rain-soaked road ahead. They were taking a shortcut, veering down a narrow alley, a forgotten artery of the city, choked with refuse and neglect. It was here, amidst the overflowing dumpsters and the rusted, dripping fire escapes, that June's sharp, observant eyes caught a detail that seemed out of place. "Boss," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. Tahung's gaze, which had been lost in the labyrinth of his thoughts, snapped back into sharp focus. He followed June's pointed finger. There, huddled against a grimy brick wall, was a crumpled figure. "Stop the car," Tahung commanded, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable air of authority, brooking no argument. The car glided to a silent stop. Tahung didn't even consider an umbrella. He opened the door and stepped out into the relentless downpour, the rain immediately saturating his expensive suit jacket. As he drew closer, the shape resolved itself into a person, a woman. She was curled up in a tight ball, her clothes torn and caked in mud, clinging desperately to her shivering frame. One side of her face was swollen and lacerated, a dark, ugly bruise blooming across her skin like a grotesque flower. Her hair, a cascade of beautiful tight curls, was matted and tangled with rain and grime. A sudden, searing surge of anger coursed through Tahung, so intense it startled him. He was no stranger to violence. He had witnessed it, and when necessary, he had wielded it himself. But the sight of this defenseless, broken woman, exposed to the elements in this forgotten alley, felt like a personal affront, a violation of the very order he struggled to uphold. He moved slowly, cautiously, not wanting to frighten her further. He knelt in a puddle, the icy water seeping through his pants, but he didn't seem to register the discomfort. The woman flinched, her eyes wide with a terror that was almost unbearable to witness. She instinctively tried to press herself further against the cold, unforgiving brick wall, a small, helpless movement that seemed to break something deep within him. "It's okay," he murmured, his voice softer than it had been in years, almost a whisper. "I'm not going to hurt you." He saw the doubt flickering in her eyes. He understood it. Why should she trust anyone, especially a man who found her alone and vulnerable in a dark alley? So, he did something completely out of character, something he rarely, if ever, did. He made himself vulnerable. Slowly, deliberately, he removed his long, impeccably tailored coat, a garment worth more than most people earned in a month, and without a moment's hesitation, he draped it over her trembling shoulders. The gesture was gentle, careful not to aggravate her injuries. The warmth of the dry, luxurious wool was a shock to her cold, rain-soaked skin. Her eyes, filled with a mixture of pain and fear, met his. In that moment he saw not just a victim, but a person, a strong spirit that had been pushed to the absolute limits of endurance. He looked directly into her eyes, his gaze unwavering and reassuring. "You're safe now," he said, each word distinct and solid, like a promise etched in stone. No one will ever hurt you again. The words seemed to have a tangible effect on her. The rigid tension in her shoulders eased ever so slightly. A single tear, warm against the cold rain, traced a path through the dirt on her cheek. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. That was all he needed. Tahung turned to June, who had moved closer, standing a respectful distance away. "Get the door," he commanded. Then, with a surprising and almost unbelievable gentleness, Tahung slid one arm beneath her knees and the other behind her back. He lifted her as if she were made of the most delicate glass. She was surprisingly light in his arms. He felt her tense for a fleeting moment, then a soft sigh escaped her lips, and she rested her head against his chest. A strange, unfamiliar feeling of warmth washed over him. He carried her, this broken stranger, to the open car door and carefully placed her on the soft leather seat. "Home, June, and call Dr. Kim. Tell him it's an emergency." The car pulled away, leaving the dark, rain-swept alley behind. Inside, the world was hushed and warm. The woman, whose name he did not yet know, Nala, had drifted into an exhausted sleep, her head resting against the window. Tahung didn't take his eyes off her. He watched the slow, steady rhythm of her breathing. The rain streaked down the window beside her, and the city lights blurred past, but his attention was solely focused on her. He had found a broken treasure in the rain, and a powerful, primal instinct, one he didn't even know he possessed, roared to life within him. It was the instinct to protect, to shield, to defend. This was more than just a rescue. It was a beginning. The world slowly returned to Nala, not with a sudden shock, but as a gradual, painful tide of awareness. The first thing she noticed was the absence of the cold, the biting, bone-chilling cold of the rain and the alley, replaced by a profound, all-enveloping warmth. The second was the softness. Instead of the hard, wet concrete, she was lying on a bed that felt like a cloud, wrapped in smooth, clean sheets. The third was the pain. A dull, throbbing ache pulsed across her face and ribs with every heartbeat, a brutal reminder of the ordeal she had endured. She forced her eyes open, a difficult task with one of them swollen almost completely shut. The room was dimly lit by a single, soft lamp in the corner. It was a spacious room, decorated with simple, elegant furniture. There were no personal photographs, no clutter, no identifying details. It was beautiful, but it felt like a very expensive hotel room, impersonal and sterile. A cold, familiar panic began to prickle at the edges of her mind. Where was she? Who had brought her here? The memory of the alley, of the man kneeling in the rain, was hazy, like a distant dream. Had it even been real? Just as her breathing started to quicken, the door opened silently. The man from the alley stood there. He looked different in the warm, indoor light. He was still tall and broad-shouldered, still possessed that quiet air of authority, but he had changed into simple, dark clothes. He wasn't wearing shoes, she noticed. He moved into the room with a predator's grace, but his expression was carefully neutral. "You're awake," he said, his voice low and calm. "How are you feeling?" Nala tried to speak, but her throat was dry and constricted. All that came out was a rough croak. "Thirsty," she managed to rasp. He seemed to understand. He walked to a side table where a pitcher of water and a glass sat. He poured the water slowly, the sound of the liquid filling the quiet room. He didn't bring it to her immediately. Instead, he placed the full glass on the nightstand within her easy reach, then took several steps back, giving her space. It was a small gesture, but it was thoughtful, revealing. It told her that he understood her fear and was respecting it. "My name is Tahung," he said, staying where he was. "You're in my home. You're safe here. No one can find you here." She looked at the water, then back at him. Her survival instincts, sharpened by recent betrayal, screamed at her not to trust him. But her body, desperate for relief, won out. She slowly, painfully, pushed herself up on her elbows and reached for the glass. Her hand trembled so violently she could barely hold it. He didn't move to help her. He simply watched, allowing her to do it on her own, allowing her to retain her dignity. The water was the most wonderful thing she had ever tasted. Over the next few days, a quiet routine established itself. A kind, gentle older woman brought her meals, simple, nourishing food like soup and rice. A doctor, a serious man named Dr. Kim, came and went, examining her wounds, changing her bandages, speaking in hushed tones with Tahung outside her door. Tahung himself was a constant presence, but never overwhelming. He would sit in a chair in the corner of her room for hours, sometimes reading, sometimes just looking out the window, saying nothing. He was like a guardian lion, silent and watchful. His silence wasn't threatening. It was protective. One afternoon, she was feeling stronger, sitting up in bed. He was in his usual chair. The silence felt different today, less oppressive. "Your name," he said, not looking at her, but out the window. "I never learned your name." She hesitated. Giving her name felt like surrendering a piece of herself, the last piece she had left. But she owed him her life. "Nala," she whispered. "My name is Nala." He turned his head and looked at her, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. "Nala," he repeated, and the way he said it, with a certain soft respect, made her name sound beautiful and strong. That single exchange was like the first crack in a dam. The next day he asked her, "The man who did this to you, did you know him?" And the story, the painful, shameful story, came tumbling out. She told him about coming to Korea for a fresh start, about meeting Jean, who had seemed charming and kind. She told him about the lies, the gradual isolation from the few friends she had made, the way he took control of her money. Her voice trembled as she described the final, terrible argument. His rage when she said she was leaving, the first shocking blow. She didn't cry. She had run out of tears. She just felt hollow. Tahung listened without a single interruption. His face was a mask, but she saw the muscle in his jaw tighten, a tiny, furious tick. When she finished, the room was silent for a long time. "He will never come near you again," Tahung said, his voice dangerously quiet. It wasn't a boast or a promise. It was a simple statement of fact, as certain as the sun rising. "I should call the police," Nala said, but it sounded weak, even to her own ears. "I will handle Jean," Tahung said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "My way, for you. It will be over." As the weeks passed, Nala's body healed. The bruises faded from angry purples and blues to sickly yellows and greens, then vanished completely. The cuts closed into thin, pink lines. She began to move around the spacious apartment, exploring the book-lined study, the modern kitchen that was never used. She and Tahung began to talk about other things. She learned about his childhood, about a father who was not a good man, about the struggles that forced him to become hard to survive in a hard world. He learned about her life back home, her dreams of being a fashion designer, her love for vibrant colors and bold patterns, a stark contrast to his world of shadows and neutral tones. They were sitting on the large sofa in the living room one evening, a comfortable silence between them. The city lights glittered like a field of diamonds outside the massive window. Nala was looking at him, at the way the light played across his serious face, and she felt a sudden, overwhelming surge of gratitude, and something else, something warmer and more frightening. Without thinking, she reached out and placed her hand over his where it rested on the sofa cushion. The effect was instantaneous. He went completely still. He looked down at her hand, small and dark against his own, then back up at her face. His dark eyes were wide with surprise, and then something else, a deep, smoldering intensity that made her breath catch. He turned his hand over slowly so that their palms met. His fingers interlaced through hers, his grip firm and warm and sure. He leaned toward her, slowly, deliberately, giving her every possible chance to pull away. His eyes asked a silent question. Her answer was to lean in, to close her own eyes. When his lips met hers, it was not a kiss of passion, but of promise. It was soft, searching, and incredibly gentle. It was a kiss that spoke of safety, of understanding, of a connection that had been growing in the quiet spaces between them for weeks. It was a spark that ignited a slow-burning fire in her chest. When they finally parted, they just looked at each other, breathing softly. No words were needed. The wall between the rescued and the rescuer had crumbled completely. In its place was something new, something fragile and beautiful and strong. He brought his other hand up and gently, so gently, cupped the side of her face, his thumb stroking the skin where a bruise had once been. It was the most intimate gesture she had ever known. In that quiet room high above the city, Nala was no longer a victim seeking shelter. She was a woman, and she was falling in love with the man who had taught her what safety felt like. The peace that had settled over to Hung's apartment was a living, breathing thing. It was in the quiet mornings where Nala would wake to find him already watching her. A softness in his eyes that was for her alone. It was in the shared afternoons where she would sketch her clothing designs at the large table, and he would conduct his business on the phone. His voice a low, steady murmur that had become the soundtrack to her new life. The sharp edges of her fear had been smoothed away, replaced by a profound sense of belonging. She was no longer a guest in his space. She was a part of his world. He was her anchor, and she was, as she had come to realize, the only thing that could calm the storm that always seemed to swirl just beneath his calm surface. This hard-won peace was shattered one evening by a sharp, insistent buzz from the building's intercom. Hung's head snapped up from his book, his body instantly tense. The relaxed man of the last few weeks was replaced in a heartbeat by the vigilant protector. He walked to the panel, his movements deliberate. Yes, a voice, distorted by the cheap speaker but dripping with a familiar, slimy arrogance, filled the room. I'm looking for Nala. Tell her Jean is here. She can't hide from me forever. Nala's blood ran cold. The sketches slipped from her numb fingers, fluttering to the floor. The room, which had felt so safe only moments before, now felt like a glass box, exposed and vulnerable. The past had not forgotten her. It had found her. She wrapped her arms around herself, the old terror threatening to pull her under. But then she looked at Hung. His back was to her, but she could see the set of his shoulders, the way his knuckles were white as he gripped the intercom. He didn't look back at her. He didn't need to. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud. It was low, flat, and carried a finality that was more terrifying than any shout. Wait there. He turned. The look on his face was not one of anger, but of cold, utter certainty. He walked toward her, and instead of the fury she expected, he took her face in his hands. His touch was, as always, gentle. Stay inside, he said, his voice firm. Lock the door after me. Do not look out the window. Hung, please don't, she begged, fear for him eclipsing her fear for herself. He shook his head, a small, final movement. I told you you were safe with me, he said, his eyes holding hers. I meant it forever. This ends tonight. He turned and walked out the door. The sound of the lock clicking into place was the loudest sound she had ever heard. She stood frozen in the center of the room, her heart hammering against her ribs. She heard the distant ping of the elevator, then silence. The urge to run to the window to see what was happening was a physical ache. But she had promised him. She trusted him. So she stood her ground, her entire being focused on the man who was facing her demons for her. Time stretched and warped. It felt like an eternity before she heard the elevator return. The door unlocked, and Hung stepped back inside. He was calm. His clothes were undisturbed. There was no sign of a struggle, but his eyes held a dark, settled stillness that told her everything she needed to know. Jean was gone, not just from the doorstep, but from her life, permanently. He walked to her, and she ran into his arms, burying her face in his chest. He held her tightly, one hand cradling the back of her head. It's over, Nala, he whispered into her hair. He will never frighten you again. You are free. And in that moment she truly was. The last chain of her past had been broken. The fear that had been a constant companion for so long simply evaporated, leaving behind a boundless, soaring feeling of liberation. She looked up at him, This man who had pulled her from the rain and given her back her life, and her heart felt so full she thought it might burst. She was not just safe. She was loved. Weeks later, on a night so clear the stars seemed close enough to touch, he led her out onto the spacious terrace of his penthouse. The city below was a sprawling tapestry of light. The air was warm, and the sounds of the metropolis were a distant, gentle hum. They stood together, his arm around her, in a comfortable silence that spoke more than words ever could. Then he turned her to face him. His expression was serious, but his eyes were shining with a vulnerability she had only ever seen when he looked at her. He took both of her hands in his. "Nala," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "Before you, my world was black and white. It was about power, about control. It was about survival." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "You brought color into my life. You brought music into my silence. You showed me that my strength wasn't just for fighting. It was for protecting what I love most." He released one of her hands and slowly, never breaking eye contact, lowered himself to one knee. From his pocket, he drew out a small black velvet box. Nala's breath hitched, her hands flying to her mouth. He opened the box. Inside, nestled against the velvet, was a ring. It was not a large, flashy stone, but a perfect, brilliant diamond surrounded by smaller, deep blue sapphires. It was elegant, strong, and breathtakingly beautiful, just like their story. "You are my heart," he said, his voice clear and strong now, filled with all the love he held for her. "You are my peace. Will you stay with me? Will you be my wife? Will you be my forever?" Tears of pure, unadulterated joy streamed down Nala's face. There were no doubts, no hesitations, only a perfect, certain yes. "Yes, to Hung," she whispered, her voice trembling with happiness. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto her finger. Perfect fit. Felt not like a new weight, but like a part of her that had been missing. He stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that held all the promises of their future. A future of safety, of passion, of a love that had been forged in the rain and was now destined to last a lifetime. Their wedding was not a large public affair. It was held in a beautiful, sun-drenched garden, surrounded only by their most trusted friends. Nala wore a stunning white gown, a design of her own creation that flowed around her like liquid light. Hung, in a classic black tuxedo, could not take his eyes off her. As they exchanged their vows, promising to love and cherish each other for all the days of their lives, it was clear to everyone watching that this was more than a marriage. It was the completion of two souls. As they danced under a canopy of twinkling lights, held close in each other's arms, they knew their story was just beginning. They had found forever in the most unexpected place, and they would cherish every single moment of it together. If you were moved by Nala and Hung's journey from a stormy night to a sunlit forever, if you believe in stories where love heals the deepest wounds and creates unbreakable bonds, then you won't want to miss what comes next. Our channel is dedicated to bringing you these powerful tales of heart, courage, and romance. Subscribe now and join our community of dreamers. Click the subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story of a love that conquers all.